Okay, we're live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have a very special guest. His name is Scott DeLuzio, DeLuzio, and he's just published a book on August 31st, 2021. Title of the book is Surviving Son. An Afghanistan War Veteran reveals his nightmare of becoming a Gold Star brother. And it already has excellent reviews on Amazon. And he can talk more about it. It's a very timely book considering just what's happened this year. But Scott can talk more about that. So, Scott DeLuzio, are you there?
Yes, I'm here, and thank you for having me on the show.
Awesome. Well, thanks for agreeing to the interview. For people who may not have heard of your, I think this is your first book. Can you talk about your background and what led you to write Surviving Son?
Yeah, so my background is as an Army veteran. I served between 2005 and 2011. During 2010, I was deployed to Afghanistan, and my brother was deployed at the same time. We were both over there at the same time, which a lot of times people feel like that's something that doesn't happen or shouldn't happen, but it actually does happen quite often, where brothers will get deployed together. But the unique thing about our story is that my brother was killed in action while we were over there, while we both were deployed over there. And so that's a little bit about kind of me and my background. And after I came home from Afghanistan, I knew that there was a lot of my story that was that should be told, that I wanted to be told. But I wasn't quite in a place, mentally in my own head to be able to write a book. But I knew there were certain things that I didn't want to forget. So I began just jotting down notes, and I had a whole long sheet of notes that was just important information I didn't want to forget. I didn't know if it would end up being a book, but I knew that someday my kids might be interested in what I had to say and what I experienced. And so by writing that stuff down, I wouldn't forget. And then a couple of years ago, it dawned on me that maybe I should write a book. I started realizing all the struggles that a lot of veterans were having, and those veterans were going through a lot of the same things that I went through. And so I said, I wanted to be able to get it out there in front of a lot of people and say, hey, look, there's hope for you too. And so, in addition to the book Surviving Son, I also started a podcast, Drive On Podcast, where I interview other veterans and talk to them about the struggles that they've gone through and how they've overcome them, everything from PTSD to substance abuse and all sorts of different topics, some really in-depth, hard-hitting topics. And we also talk to service providers that will offer services to veterans in addition to the traditional services that you might think of, like through the VA or whatever. So we talk to a lot of those people, and they're all there to really get the message of hope across to veterans.
And so where did that really, for you and your brother, where did it all start for you to make that decision to join the military?
Yeah, so after 9/11, I think my brother and I both, we were both raised in a very patriotic family. And so after 9/11, I was in college at the time, and I almost wanted to just drop out of college right away and just join the military right off the bat. But I ended up staying and finishing my degree. And it wasn't until a couple of years after 9/11 that my brother, he started going to a school, Norwich University, which is a military school. And he ended up joining the Vermont Army National Guard. The school is up in Vermont. And so I got to learn a little bit about the military through him. And so he's my younger brother. So it's kind of, reverse roles there, where he joined first and then I joined after. And so I joined about a year later. And, it's one of those things where if my little brother can do it, I think I probably can do it too. So I kind of had that going for me too.
And so you kind of felt challenged maybe by him. And so what was your experience going into the National Guard?
Yeah, so going into the National Guard, for anyone, any of the listeners who are not familiar with the National Guard is just like the regular Army, except with the exception that we train 1 week in a month and 2 weeks a year. We're not the full-time soldiers like the active duty soldiers are, but we wear the same uniforms, use the same equipment, all that kind of stuff. We're all part of the same fighting force, and really, I like I said before, I grew up in a patriotic family, and I really wanted to give back and serve my community and my country. And I knew it was at a time where we needed soldiers, and so that's why I joined, and that's why I wanted to serve. And eventually getting deployed to Afghanistan was what I signed up to do.
So you intended to go to Afghanistan, right? When you signed up, like you knew you were going to go there.
Yeah, and at the time that we signed up in the mid 2000s, like 2005, 2006 kind of time period, you pretty much knew that if you're signing up, and at the time you signed up for like a 6-year contract, you knew at some point during that enlistment that you were going to be deployed. You didn't know, it maybe wasn't going to be that very first year, but at some point you were probably going to get deployed, and I think
Right.
most people who signed up around then knew that.
So then it took like 3 or 4 or 5 years for you to finally get sent to Afghanistan. What was that like with the knowledge that you were going to be sent overseas?
Yeah, so it was tough for me because I was in a different place in my life than I was when I signed up for the military. When I signed up and joined, I was a single guy, no real obligations at home, and by the time I got deployed, I was married and we had a newborn son at home, and so it was a much different situation for me than I had envisioned, and so it was a hard thing to do to leave my, let's see, maybe 2-month-old son at home, who was, just brand new to my life and my wife, and we're just trying to get our bearings on being parents. We had never done this before, and so then throw on top of that a deployment, and we had a big soup of stress that kind of affected all of us. But being deployed over there was, it was difficult, but it was satisfying in another way as well.
So you were sent. How long did you? Did you show up there in 2010? Is that correct?
Yeah, so we started our pre-deployment training in late 2009, like November time frame, November December. We did some training, and then late January into February we left the United States and ended up in Afghanistan early February 2010.
And so, what were your first impressions of being in country there?
Yeah, so it's kind of funny when we first landed in Afghanistan. We landed at Bagram Air Base, and if for anyone who's been there, they know that Bagram is like a big city, and it actually kind of feels like a city with the paved roads that they have, and they actually have street signs and things like that. And it actually does feel like you're in a city, and it felt relatively safe. We didn't have anything going on really there, and so. Uh, so I was thinking to myself, well, gee, this probably isn't going to be so bad if this is what Afghanistan's like. And then we moved on to the next base, Jalalabad airfield, and that was a little more rustic. And I started to think, okay, well, maybe this is not as good as I thought it was going to be. And then we finally moved to the final base where we stayed for the majority of our deployment, and that was a very remote outpost. It was about 2 miles away from the Pakistan border, and it was out there when we
What'd
landed.
you call it? Tokrom or something like that?
Yeah, Fob Torcom
Tokum.
is the name of the base that we were stationed at, and when we landed there, it was pitch black at night, and we couldn't tell if we were inside the base where we were going, or if we were outside the base. We couldn't tell, like, if really anything that was going on around us, and so it was a hectic, kind of scary situation, just stepping off that helicopter, not knowing what we were stepping out into.
Right. So you were I mean, you talk about it in the book how the American military was supposed to be kind of backing up what the Afghan military was like, right? Can you
Right.
describe how that support role was and what you were doing with the assistance supposedly of the Afghan military?
Yeah, so our job there, we were there to help kind of train the Afghan soldiers, and their army at the time consisted of volunteers with, you know they didn't really have much training. They didn't have the same level of training that the Americans had, and so we were trying to help them and teach them. But it was really difficult because when we were trying to do that, especially towards the end of the deployment for me, it was during the month of Ramadan, which, for anyone who's unfamiliar with that, it's a month of fasting and things like that, where they don't eat or drink during daylight hours at all. And during the summers in Afghanistan, it gets really, really hot. It's easily over 120 degrees on a daily basis. And so without eating or drinking, they really didn't want to do too much as far as training and, the going through the drills and the maneuvers and things like that. So it was really hard to get them to do anything. And so when it came to actually going out on missions with them and being out there, they were really having a hard time doing the missions well. And clearing the buildings and everything, because they were just so depleted of their energy and their resources and stuff because of all of that. So it was a very difficult thing to do.
Right. So you were there. I mean, you were always kind of you're talking about all of the afraid. I mean, you had encounters with the Taliban and terrorists, or what we call terrorists there. And can you describe kind of what it was like for you and the average soldier there?
Yeah. So our job, what we had to do over there was, for the most part during our deployment, was to secure the border area between Pakistan and Afghanistan, because the road that came through in the Torkham area was where the majority of the NATO supplies came through. And so we would pull over people. There'd be a lot of foot traffic going between the border, and we'd pull people over and scan them and do security checks on them. And so every once in a while we would have a high value target come through where it would be someone, a person of interest who we suspected might be involved in some terrorist activities. And so the thing is, we never knew one day to the next who was going to be coming through there, or who might start trying to test our reaction time and all that kind of stuff. So we always had to be on alert, even if it was a relatively peaceful area to be in. We always had to be on high alert, because you never knew when something bad could happen. And things would happen. I talk about it in the book, where there was a child who he was riding in the back of a truck. We call them jingle trucks, but for people around here, they're about the equivalent of a dump truck that you might see in a construction site. And he popped up from the back of it, and from my perspective, it looked like he was pointing a rifle at some of our soldiers. And so I went to raise my weapon up to shoot him, to stop him. And this was, again, maybe a 10 or 11-year-old child. And I realized at the very last second that he was just holding a piece of wood that was carved out to be the shape of a rifle. And so that was one of those things where they were kind of testing what we might do. And maybe they even wanted me to shoot this kid and kill this kid, so that they can use that as propaganda to drum up support for their cause. And so,
didn't you call it like the 4 S's or something like that in response?
Yeah. So we had the 4 S's. It was the shout, show, shove, and shoot. So where you would actually have to shout at the person first and yell at them to tell them to stop, or whatever it was that they're doing, and then you would show or shove them if you're close enough. Where you can actually push them, push them away. Then you can finally, at that point, you can show your weapon. And then at that point, if they continue to advance, then you could finally shoot them. And so it was a long progression of things that you had to go through. Now, in a situation where there was a imminent threat, and obviously this kid, he was maybe 75 yards away at the time, so I wouldn't have been able to shove him or anything like that. So I had to almost jump straight to the shoot aspect of that, and luckily I didn't. For him, it was very lucky that I did not shoot him, because it would have been a pretty easy shot for me to be able to hit him from that distance.
And you did you use interpreters there as well?
Yes, we did. Yeah, we did. And the interpreters were great that we had. A lot of them, they really did believe in the cause that we were there for, and that we were helping their country rid themselves of the Taliban and all of this stuff. So they wanted us to succeed, and so they were there really working hard for us.
Gotcha. And what can you describe what the cultural differences were like as somebody from the States coming into this, really on the other side of the world almost, of Muslim population, different language?
Yeah, it was a definite culture shock. I mean, you can go through all the cultural sensitivity training and all that kind of stuff that we went through here, and someone can tell you all they want about what it's like over there, but until you get there and you actually experience the mud huts that they live in. Literally, their houses were made out of mud, and they would just pack bricks of mud, and they'd stack them up and make a house with like a straw roof and no running water or electricity. And it was just very primitive living. No hard paved roads in going into some of these villages, and it's a really rough life, and it was the only life that they knew. And so it was, I think, also difficult for us to show them that there's anything else out there. But we'd see things that you would never expect to see here in the United States, or any maybe even in Europe or whatever. But I would, as we were working the border area, we would see people who were just walking by and they needed to use the bathroom, and so they just stopped what they're doing and they just used the bathroom right there on the road, using their hand to clean up, and then just pick up and walk away. And to me, that was just like mind blowing. That someone is just going to stop and do that in the middle of the street, and as if it's nothing. And people were walking around them as if it was nothing. It was just normal.
Wow, that's crazy. So they had the whole right hand, left hand thing that they have in desert states throughout. So wow, so no, left hand is like the accursed hand, right?
Yeah, the left hand is the unclean hand. You don't use that for shaking people's hands or eating or anything like that. Everything is always with the right hand, for them. And
wow.
And so it was definitely a different way of doing things.
So when you're out of when you're out of like Bagram or the main city, I can't remember the name. What's the main city in Afghanistan right now?
Like Kabul.
So Kabul's kind of supposedly the epicenter. The farther away you get from these main cities, you're really just going back almost in time, like 500 years.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost. I mean, if you were to like visualize like biblical times of the way people might have lived way back then, I think it's nearly the same, with the exception of there's some cars, there's some cell phones, and AK-47s, and outside of that, it's very much the same. Not much has changed since then.
And what was the attitude, kind of, other than the kind of interpreters or people who were friendly to the U.S.? Did you think that the kind of natives or the rural natives did they have a lot of animosity to the U.S.? What was their kind of opinion of the U.S. military?
Yeah, I don't know that they necessarily had animosity, but I think that a lot of them were looking to see what was in it for them. And if we had something to offer them, then they were all for us. But if it seemed like we weren't going to help them and we weren't going to give them the things that they wanted or needed, then they would be completely against us. And so it was a balancing act, to be able to win their support. And that part of the mission was to win the hearts and minds of the people who were over there. But at the same time, it's not a blank check that we can just give them anything that they ever asked for. So there was quite a bit of a balancing act with that.
Gotcha. And so then, I mean, I don't think, when I read your book, you never really encountered your brother in Afghanistan, right?
No, so the last time that I saw him was back in the United States. We were actually at the same base in Indiana, Camp Atterbury, and we had dinner together the night that I was leaving that base to go off to another base for training. And so that was the last time I saw him. And we didn't really get to talk at all when we were over there. Just the communication just was difficult, between the bases, and timing of missions, and when we were on, working and things like that. We just never really had the opportunity. We would send each other an email every once in a while when we could, just saying, hey, thinking of you, that type of thing. But I never really got a chance to talk to him. The only time I really did get any kind of updates outside of the emails from him was, when I'd call home and get to talk to my parents, and that, maybe they heard from him the week before or something like that, and they just fill me in with some of the details.
And then how did the whole situation with him passing away occur, and how did that affect you?
Yeah, so the day he died, I was out on a mission. We were flown out with the Afghan army to a very remote village. We were flown out to the mountaintop, and we went down to this village, and we were conducting our operations. We were clearing houses, looking for stolen Afghan army uniforms and weapons that the Taliban would have used. And we went through the village. We found all this stuff, and later on that day, I got a call on the radio, and find out that the commanding officer was looking for me. And so anyone who knows anything about the military, I was a sergeant, E5 sergeant, and the commanding officer very rarely would come directly looking for someone of my rank or my position. They usually would go through the chain of command of all the other people in that chain in order to get to me. And so it was very odd that he was looking for me. And so I started thinking, okay, well, geez, maybe I did something wrong, or maybe one of my guys did something wrong. And so I started trying to just run through all the things in my head, like what's going on with that. And eventually I linked up with him and got in touch with him. And we started he told me to just like come over to this kind of more secluded area, and he said, take your helmet off and take a knee. And I said, well, that sounds pretty strange. Outside the wire, outside of a base, they never tell you to take your helmet off. Like it's like a big no to take your helmet off and do that. So I was like, this must have been really bad, or something. I'm about to get some pretty bad news. And so he said, my brother, his unit got ambushed, and that my brother had gotten hit. And naturally, my mind just went to Big Brother mode. Like, how can I help him? And I wanted to, get on a helicopter. I went through the logistics of how I can get to him, and if he needed blood or if he needed an organ, if I didn't need it, he could have it, from me. And so I started going through all those mental games, trying to figure out how to get to him. And then the commander said, "No, I don't think you're really understanding me. He got hit, but he was killed." And so all the emotions came flooding out, and I broke down and everything. And it was just such a nightmare to be finding out about it this way in this place and everything. And it was just so terrible. But then about 20 minutes later, our own unit started taking fire from the enemy in the village that we had just gone through. And it was a very difficult thing to be able to have to put that grief aside and switch back into army mode and go take care of my guys and do what we needed to do to keep everybody safe on our end.
And what part of Afghanistan was your brother in, and what was he doing when he was shot?
Yeah, so he was he was also in a somewhat of a remote village, and he was in a area called Paktia province in Afghanistan. And so what he was doing, their job was a mission to very similar to ours, where they were going out and clearing a village to make sure that there was no enemy activity going on in that village. And as they're walking into that village, they ended up getting ambushed. And in that initial ambush is when he got hit. And from my understanding, he was kind of like the point man, the guy kind of in front of the formation of troops who were walking. And so he was, in the front, in the lead, and he was probably one of the first people that the enemy saw as they started opening up fire. And so that's where he was, and he ended up getting hit, and it was. It was a terrible situation for those soldiers, because not only were they in the middle of a firefight too, but they also had to figure out a way to get his body out of there, because it's one of the things that soldiers agree to is we'll never leave a fallen soldier, and we'll do anything to try to get one of our fallen out. And so
And a couple other people died in that firefight, correct? Not just
my brother was the first one killed, and then another soldier, American soldier named Tristan Southworth, he was killed while trying to evacuate my brother out of that area. But I believe also an Afghan was killed as well, on fighting on our side. But plenty of the enemy, the Taliban folks, were killed as well in that.
So then what happened next? How did that unravel with you being in Afghanistan and what was going on back home in the US?
Yeah, so that was one of the things that was really difficult for me. Was I was sitting on a mountaintop in the middle of nowhere in Afghanistan, and so the commanding officer recognized that I was in no shape to be there anymore, and I was obviously going to be sent home for his funeral and all that kind of stuff. So he had a helicopter come and take me out, pretty much as soon as he could after that firefight had taken place. And so I went out, and the next day there was what's called a ramp ceremony, which is where they bring the bodies of the fallen soldiers onto the plane that's going to take them out of the country. And so I like to equate that as it's kind of like a military equivalent of like a Catholic wake, where you go and pay your respects to the fallen and all that kind of stuff. And so we had that, and I was fortunate enough to be able to be blood relative to be able to be there and greet the people. And there were so many people from all over the world who came to this. Polish soldiers and civilian contractors and high-ranking military officials or generals and stuff like that. And so it really meant a lot to be able to be a part of that. But then that took us. So I ended up getting onto that flight, and that flight took us to Kuwait, and that's where my brother and I parted ways. Where he went on his separate way to go through the processing that his body needed to go through, and I continued on my journey home. And so I was home probably about 2 to 3 days after he was killed. So I was basically plucked right off the battlefield and in my home just a few days later, and it was a tough transition, to not have that kind of a decompression time and being able to process everything that had happened. But as far as like what was going on at home, I wasn't able to call home until I got to Kuwait. So I didn't even know whether or not my parents knew that my brother was killed. And one of the protocols is there's a communications blackout after a soldier is killed, and that's just to make sure that the next of kin are notified appropriately, and so that they don't end up getting a surprise phone call by someone like myself to let them know of anything that had happened over there. So I was not allowed to call home, and it was, I was never left alone. I was always with people, but it was a very lonely feeling because I felt like I was on another planet almost with my family and the people who I really wanted to be with and be close to. It was just really hard to get in touch with them though.
So you had the ceremony and the services, and what happened next to with your career in the National Guard?
Yeah, so I found myself after my brother was killed, after coming back home, I just kind of in a funk. I was just not myself anymore. I was angry, I was depressed, I was sad, I was grieving still, but grieving in bad ways, and I wasn't handling it very well. And I also had gotten injured on that last mission that I was on, where I had injured my knee, and so I required some surgery on my knee, and that surgery was going to require like 6 to 9 months of healing time and physical therapy and that type of stuff. And that was about all the time that I had left in the military. By that time, I would have been discharged, and so I was going into the training every 1 week in a month and 2 weeks a year and everything, and I wasn't doing anything. I was just sitting there watching everyone else go off and run around the woods and do whatever that they do for the training, and I felt useless, and that just added on to the depression that I had. And so I looked up, would it be possible for me to be discharged early from the military, getting out of my full commitment? And in the Army, there's a regulation called the Surviving Sons and Daughters, and that's where the title of the book Surviving Son comes from. And it basically states that if you are a surviving son or a daughter who had a sibling or some other family member killed in action in the military, then you could be discharged out of the military and be released from your commitment to your contract with the military. So that's what ended up happening, and I filed that paperwork to be released early, and ultimately, like anything in the military and the government, things took a little while, but eventually I ended up getting a phone call one morning and saying, hey, your paperwork got approved and you're officially out, you're discharged. And so I didn't realize that transition was going to hit me as hard as it did. It was like a light switch going off, where one night I went to bed thinking, I still have this identity as a soldier. This is still who I am. And then I flipped the switch the next morning, and all of a sudden, boom, I'm no longer a soldier. And it was a hard to lose that identity too. And I didn't realize that at the time that it would have been so hard, but it was something that affected me quite a bit.
And so, I don't think you're alone. There's many people, many veterans who experienced a lot of emotional, psychological PTSD. Can you describe what yours was like and what helped you to get through it?
Yeah, so I mean, after getting back home, I struggled a lot where I was um, not sleeping enough. I was having the all the nightmares and just difficulty getting to sleep, staying asleep, all that kind of stuff, and so I was really struggling with that, and I the only way I was able to find myself able to get to sleep was either through sleeping pills or drinking too much to just make myself basically pass out and fall asleep. And that was clearly not a healthy way to do things, and don't recommend anyone use those ways of doing that. But and you're right, a lot of people do struggle with this, and they do things like self medicate, and it's just not the right way to go. And so eventually, the lack of sleep and the not taking care of myself and all of these things just all started bubbling up, and it just really did make me into a much angrier person, a different person than I had been before, and that's not the kind of person I really wanted to be. And so I said, you know what, something has to change, and only I can change me, and I can't just wait for everyone else to change so that everything else gets better. But what I ended up doing is going to the vet center, which is affiliated through the VA, and that they're available for anybody who served in any of the wars that we fought as a nation, or even for the families of our fallen soldiers. They're available for counseling for that as well. And so, needless to say, I ticked a couple of the boxes that allowed me to use their services, and so by going into uh, the vet center, I was able to talk about things and process my emotions a little bit better, and get through some of these things, and kind of overcome those hurdles that I was dealing with.
Yeah, I've known a couple of people from Iraq who had a lot of lingering problems, like bad nightmares, same type of thing, kind of self-medicated to try to calm their nerves, or what would be shell shock. I think you described that in the book. So yeah, it's a hard thing. Do you still have flashbacks of being in Afghanistan?
I do sometimes, like that situation that I described with that child on the back of that truck, pointing the weapon, and that was one of those things that I never really thought of myself as a type of person who could ever harm a child, who could ever do any kind of harm or damage to a child. But then I was standing there with a rifle pointed at a kid with the safety off of my finger on the trigger, and I was ready to kill them. And so that was something that was just really like raw and hard to process. And I later found out that's called a moral injury, where it really strikes down like the who you thought you were, and it injures you in that way. And so I had a lot of problems with that and processing that, but um, I also would relive that experience, and where I would actually feel everything that I felt while I was standing there that day, where I'd feel the pressure of the rifle against my shoulder, and see the things that I saw and smell the things that I smelled, and it really takes me back to being in that place. And those things, they'll happen from time to time where I just will end up in that position, and it's bizarre when it happens. But
And what you kind of feel like the Afghan war was worthwhile, right? Or what's your kind of thought about you being there, the war, and what happened just recently in 2021?
yeah, so I feel that there's a lot of people who feel like the war was a wasted effort, and that these lives were lost for nothing, including my brothers. And I talk about this in the book as well. In Surviving Son, I talk about my thought on this is that we took the fight to their backyard. 9/11 happened. Obviously, that was a tragedy. It was a terrible thing, and we never wanted that to happen here again. And so we took the fight over there. And for those 20 years, I think we did a good job at keeping the fight over there, and not having the terrorists be able to rearrange our skylines anymore. We didn't have planes crashing into buildings and causing any kind of destruction on the level of a 9/11. But then I also look at the good that we did for the people of Afghanistan. We allowed them to live in relative peace for those 20 years. Their children got to go to schools. The infrastructure projects, the bridges, the roads, the water, electricity, all those kinds of things that we worked on over there helped to improve the lives of the people who were over there. And yeah, I do wish that, maybe things were done a little bit differently as far as the withdrawal goes. But I really do feel like, we did a lot of good, and I am hopeful for the people of Afghanistan, because some of those children who got an opportunity to go to school, they are now older. They're probably adults and parents of their own kids, and I think it's probably pretty universal that parents are typically going to want better for their children than what they had. And if they had the opportunity to go to school, and then now all of a sudden the Taliban's taking that ability for their children to go to school, I think that's going to probably anger quite a few of these people. And I'm hopeful that it'll light a little fire in them, and it'll give them some desire to push back and fight back against,
to change it. Yeah, I mean, they got a taste of freedom, see what it's like now. Now they got no freedom under the Taliban. I mean, they have
right.
the Islamic version of it, I guess. Where's the best place to buy the book? Do you have it on Amazon, or I don't remember. Do you have like a Kindle version too, right?
Yeah, so the book's available on Amazon, paperback and the Kindle version, so you can go there. You can go to survivingsunbook.com to check that out. If you wanted an autographed copy, or we have links to the Amazon site, you can get all of that there. And as far as the podcast goes, driveonpodcast.com, or anywhere that you listen to podcasts, you can just search for Drive On Podcast, and you should be able to find it there as well.
Gotcha. And it's under Scott DeLuzio on Drive On Podcast, right? And your website is survivingsunbook.com. That's correct. And people can reach out to you there. Do you have contact information there, or other social media?
Yep, social media, is there. You can usually the podcast is the best way to get me. Drive On Podcast on all of the socials: Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. Wherever you happen to be on there. Also, Scott DeLuzio on all those as well. So you can check all those out, and there's links to all the social media on all of those websites as well, and contact forms if you want to just reach out directly.
Gotcha. And right now on Amazon, you've got 14 5-star reviews. This book was just published 2 weeks ago. Again, the title of the book is Surviving Son, an Afghanistan War Veteran reveals his nightmare of becoming a Gold Star brother. And the author is Scott DeLuzio. Scott, thank you for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
All right, take care. Stay there.